how to use metadata to enrich content files. You may have heard the term metadata. Most people think of HTML meta tags, which are descriptive tags on web pages that show up in search engines. They're not as important as they used to be. They still are useful, but most people have heard of that meta tag and they think of that as metadata. Maybe you heard that metadata means data about data. It's some cryptic thing for databases. Or also people will say, oh, metadata is the future. It is the basis of the semantic web that Tim Berners-Lee and others are working on somewhere in a laboratory. But actually, metadata is working behind the scenes all day long with a lot of things that you do on your computer and your web. You just don't see it, but it adds value. So I'm going to offer a very practical application of using metadata that's often overlooked, easy to use, and it will enrich your use of content files that you produce, publish, and distribute for your organization. So here's a simple example. Whenever you use a digital camera, it automatically records a lot of information about the picture you're taking. It records the date and the time, the camera model, the number of pixels and the resolution of your image. It'll even capture the exposure settings and all kinds of miscellaneous information so that when you look at that photograph on a computer system later. Well, it used to be that people with film would actually stamp the date in the image. You still see a lot of photographs that have that. Now with metadata, it's invisible. It's in the image file somewhere, but it doesn't display with the image. It's picked up by the software, so you can see all that information. And that's really useful because if you take your photo and upload it to Flickr or some other system for sharing those photos, you may notice that that information displays next to the photograph. If you look at people's photographs on Flickr, you can see what kind of camera they're using, the exact date and time they took the picture. Some of these cameras now have GPS and will tell you the exact location. It's really interesting. This information is captured automatically, displayed, and can be used in very interesting ways. This is made possible with a metadata standard called XIF, the Exchangeable Image File Format. It's used by pretty much every camera and scanner manufacturer. Most picture editing software now has this. It's very common. That's the great thing about metadata standards. Once they're embraced by industries and by people and by systems, it just becomes second nature. You just would be surprised if you didn't see that information with a photograph today. So what's the big deal here, really? Well, what's special about this kind of metadata is that it used to be with computer systems that the metadata was stored in a database, and if you didn't have your files in a context where that database managed them, you wouldn't have access to the metadata. So if the file goes to somebody else on a computer disk or attached to an email or across the web, if they didn't have access to the same database as you, they wouldn't have access to that information. Metadata has changed all of that so that now the information can ride with the file wherever it goes. Now that's really revolutionary to have it embedded in the file wherever it goes. And there are lots of global standards for storing this kind of metadata. With your rich content, with documents, with images, with videos, it's really important to think about what kind of metadata you want to travel with that image as it goes across the web. Because let's face it, things go far and wide these days, and you don't necessarily have control over the context that people see things. But if you can get this metadata in your files, then people will understand, well, who are you? Who made this? What's the title of this piece? Is there copyright on it? All that information can be embedded. So how do you do it? Well, the best program is Adobe Bridge. Adobe Bridge is a companion media manager that comes with a creative suite from Adobe or any individual Adobe program from the suite. So if you buy Photoshop or Dreamweaver, you get a copy of Bridge for free. I wish they would just give it away or sell it. But no, Adobe is a proprietary company. I haven't found anything that is quite as good as Adobe Bridge for general use that's either free or cheap. So if you got Creative Suite, you're in business. So here's what you do. Let's say you create a document, and it could be in Word, OpenOffice, InDesign. And then you save that or convert it to a PDF. When you open that PDF file in Adobe Reader, you might notice that if you look in Properties, it has a title, it has an author. Could be wrong. It might be the person who was sitting at your computer several years ago whose name got stamped in there. I see this all the time. Well, you could go into a program like Adobe Acrobat and edit that information and make it correct. But to do it even better, if you open up that file with Adobe Bridge, you'll see that information, be able to edit it, and you'll see lots more information that you would not see in Acrobat. In Adobe Bridge, there is a little metadata panel over in the right corner you can turn on, and you can see all the different fields that you can tag with this information. The most important standard and little section in that metadata panel in Adobe Bridge is IPTC. That stands for International Press Telecommunications Council, which is a global organization that has created a standard for the exchange of news content around the world. This works great. So you can put in the creator, contact information, title, headline, description, keywords, copyright, all the description information and all the legal information that describes where the image came from, or the video, or the document, who created it, what's the headline, what's the legal information for using it. It's really easy to do, and you can apply this from Adobe Bridge to almost any kind of rich content file. It's amazing. It actually gives you a kind of a homegrown, free-form digital asset management system called a DAM system, and those things can be very expensive, very complex, and with Adobe Bridge, you have access to the same techniques that major newspapers, magazines, advertising agencies all use to manage their content. And no matter where your content files go, guess what? People will know that you made it, they'll know what you want to call it, and they'll know if you have a copyright on that. Could be copyright that restricts them distributing it, or it could be a Creative Commons copyright that allows them to distribute it, and people know it comes from you. So that's how to use metadata to enrich your content files.